little bit of context for our conversation today. So my name is Brooke Hempell. I work with TruMotivate and work with our colleges to help figure out what a vision would look like of bringing TruMotivate onto their campus, help with implementation. I do a lot of behind the scenes operations. So wear a lot of different hats here with our team, but tend to have a great opportunity to work with colleges in thinking through how TruMotivate can help their students to advance in a not even former life, kind of other half life. I've been a market researcher for many years, and I do a lot of research on next generation, especially, and also on diversity. And so some of my research has, in the last couple of years, has been working with people's perceptions of diversity, racial justice issues, of vocation, of next generation, Gen Z primary issues, mental health, things like that. So a lot of the topics we're going to be touching on today will touch on some of the research that I've been able to do in that kind of in my other hat. So you may hear me mention bits of that, and that's where that comes from. But I love being able to apply a lot of that to the work that we do at TruMotivate. So that's quick background on myself. Let me introduce our two other panelists here. Brittany, would you like to start?
Yeah, definitely. So hello, everyone. It's nice to see your black square, which is, you can say that way. But my name is Brittane Geleske. My background is in higher education and college student development, with more of a concentration on supporting and providing services for students of color, international students within the higher education sector. So I've been across the board, been working in higher ed for about a decade, and then was recently at the University of Northwestern. So I see some UNW names. So it's nice to see you all. And served as their director of intercultural programs, and recently left in December, and am now doing some independent higher education consulting work. I'm currently doing some project management work with TruMotivate, and then it was a blessing truly to use the TruMotivate tool initially at Northwestern with some of my student groups. So that's kind of just a little bit about me. Julian?
Hey guys, my name is Julian. My background is primarily in consulting, sales, and recruiting, but I did spend 3 years as the graduate director of admissions at a small school in the Northeast called Nyack College, where I actually also got my master's degree. So my perspective is really one that helps people get on their career path and get accelerated on their career path. I've done a lot of individual career coaching. I love personality assessments. I run clients through a number of them, pretty much a battery of assessments, and TruMotivate has really stuck out to me because it's focused on the narrative. It's focused on not just competencies, but people's motivations, their why, which is, more, I guess, hot business lingo nowadays is, what is your why, right? And that's always the thing that companies come to me and they want high talent to be able to connect with their why, right? They want their why to connect with the why of the mission of the organization. And so that's really my passion, is activating people in their purpose. And I think TruMotivate is a great tool for that. So I'm just getting started with the TruMotivate team, but I'm very excited in putting this in front of more people's faces.
Thank you. And both Brittany and Julian are on our advisory committee. We have a number of advisors who are in higher education who've helped us to think through the ways that TruMotivate can help students in different aspects of their academic and professional careers. And so we're really thankful for them and for their contribution to helping us to support students, support schools as they use this tool. So our conversation is going to focus broadly on how do we help students with diverse backgrounds. And we'll focus some on just general personal development, maybe academic pathways, and then some also on career. So it's a mixed, but both of them have great expertise in this area. And so I'm really looking forward to some of the insights that they will be able to share with us that we hope will really be something that you can activate in your own campuses. So I do have some questions I'd love to throw out to get us started. And Julian, you kind of touched on a little bit of the why. And for me, that really brings up the idea of when you think about this assessment, it is more about our why and more about why do we do the things that we do, as opposed to focusing on our competencies, what you can do. And talking with a lot of students from a lot of different backgrounds, you often hear them focus on what they can do, and they've been told a lot about what they can do, but maybe not as much on understanding their why. Why is it important for students, especially of diverse backgrounds, to be able to think about their why? What's the significance of that for them? And either of you are welcome to jump in.
Yeah, I think when I reflect back on the work that I have done previously with this age, I think providing space to have students be drivers or co-creators in the process of understanding and their identity development, right? I think it's a very authentic place to begin and start with students as well. And I especially have seen that as a high value with this current generation of college students, is that it's not me just telling you hard skills. It's really me taking time and providing space to get to know who you are and having questions that help you process some of those deeper whys. And I think oftentimes what I've seen is maybe time not taken for that. I mean, we all have different reasons why. And then also sometimes students' backgrounds, the values that they have culturally are very different than what their current university culture says are values to the university. And so there can be some really hard dissonance in trying to, like, how do I fit in this if my value is this, but that's not being reflected back to me. Either I'm picking up on just a culture vibe, or it's hard for me to articulate. And so to really have intentionality around, yes, this might feel like a different environment than what you have been used to interacting with. And we want to be explicit about that. We want to acknowledge that. We want to honor that. We want to help you transition and still maintain who you are. And I think TruMotivate being a practical tool to provide language for that for the student and for you as the staff member or facilitator of that. So some common ground language to help in that guidance personally with my work with students was pretty crucial. So yeah, just some initial thoughts about that.
That's great. Yeah. Anything else to add on that, Julian?
Yeah, I'd say for me, the importance of getting to someone's why is kind of everything. I don't think I always had that language, but being a student of color who's gone to predominantly white institutions for my whole academic career, you quickly notice that a lot of times, and this is something that we all do, students of color, people already have a narrative in their mind, whether they realize it or not, about how this student may be or how this student may come across or what their experience might be. And so what I love is TruMotivate really breaks that barrier initially to be able to say, oh, this is the story behind Julian or Brittany or Brooke, right? This is the story behind an individual. And that's just the way that things currently are, you know, and I found myself doing it. You know, I worked with a lot of international students, and just because people are from the same country, same region, same city, does not mean they have the exact same story, doesn't mean they have the same exposure. And exposure is one of the biggest things that I think universities are great for, exposing people to things that they have yet to be exposed to. But in knowing their stories, you can also say, oh, okay, this person may not have the words to articulate this, but they may have an entrepreneurial bent that needs to be tapped into, right? They may have an aptitude for sales that hasn't been tapped into yet, or for a love for math and science, but haven't had the resource or the exposure yet to really dial in on that. And these stories are things that most of us may not think are important, especially when you're just, you know, 18-year-old freshman in undergrad or something like that. But they can really lend so much to who someone is, what their values are, and what might be a fulfilling career path for them. Not just something to put money in their bank account, but to fulfill their purpose.
Yeah.
And I think, like Brittany said, one of the things I love most about TruMotivate is that it really puts language to that. It puts meat on that sandwich, you know. So you can take that forward and really feed someone with what it is they're looking for at a university. Yeah. A lot of people come to university for an opportunity, but there could be a lot more than that available. We can make a lot more than that available to them if we understand it better.
Yeah. And I like that idea of exposure. I want to come back to that and dig in a little bit further there later, because I think that's a huge opportunity that we have when students are on campus. But I do think it's really interesting thinking about the current mindset that if you've got a student who's coming into campus for the first time, you know, what mindset they might be coming from. They might be coming from a sort of mindset where there's high expectations on them from their family, or there's a pressure financially, or all these different things that can focus them in on what can you do because you need to do this thing. And it might feel like a luxury to even think about what I love doing. I was sharing with Brittany recently that my husband comes from an immigrant family. His mom was a refugee. That was a luxury to think about what you enjoy doing. You didn't really think about that. You thought about what could get you from A to B to be financially secure, right? And so I think that pressure on all students is even higher today of, if we're going to invest in your education, we really need you to focus on what you're good at doing. And you get told that all the way along, right? And we've noticed that we have to give students permission to think about what they enjoy. That's not something that even comes naturally a lot of times. And so there may be some barriers that we have to break through on that to help them get to that way of thinking.
Well, and I think, you know, just to add on to that, I think the luxury piece and the privilege of that is actually very significant in terms of the mindset. And so, I mean, this, granted, it can take many different conversations, right, to get to the heart and the deeper why, but it can also be done in one, right, in taking the time to do that. And it doesn't, I think sometimes the most powerful things aren't truly like revolutionary. It's like, oh yeah, I need to take a beat. And so, yeah, I think it doesn't have to also be this long drawn out thing. I think there are also strategies around, I want to make sure that in my practice with students that this is something that I incorporate. So
yeah, let's talk about that. And because maybe both of you have some examples of how do you apply that. So if you think about story, right, the story gives you some tools as an advisor to be able to kind of dig into where might those opportunities be and what are some insights about the student. So what is it that's helpful about story when you're thinking about advising students or helping them to kind of develop their pathways and stay on their pathways, especially when it comes to students with diverse backgrounds? Like, how would you advise using story, or what's the particular value of their story? I know that was a lot in there.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, Julian, you can take it if you want.
Okay. So I can just speak from specific examples. So working with students for admission, I had students who were 21 years old. I had students who were, in their 40s and 50s, right? Mm-hmm. And I was not an academic advisor, right? I was not, after their admission process, I wasn't supposed to guide them when it came specifically to class structure and things like that. What should I take next? What major would actually suit me, kind of thing. But that quickly became part of my job description because of who I am. It is a very diverse school. And so a lot of people would come to me just because of that familiarity of, hey, this is my academic advisor, Professor so-and-so. But let me just ask you a couple questions, because there was an expectation that, hey, we speak the same language. And so I need to have this explained to me or have this conversation in a language that is familiar to me, right? I think that's a really common story in faculty and staff members of color in predominantly white institutions. And so that important story piece typically comes out in those environments, right? But that might not be an environment that everyone else has access to. With a tool like TruMotivate, that's what you can unlock for everyone. They can be able to articulate these stories in a way that says, oh, because I've told these parts of my life that were true and rang true for me, I now understand these are 5 of the things that are really important to me when it comes to how I spend my time, how I spend my talents, and what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so that helps us. That really helped me be able to say, hey, maybe this is a line of career that you may think about going down, because X, Y, and Z seems to be important to you. And you also have these skills, A, B, and C. Have you thought about this? Mm-hmm. So that's been the biggest thing for me is, Brittany, you're so right. Like sometimes that's such a luxury that people have. What do I want to do? What do I really love to do? But at the end of the day, I've got to make money. My parents, or just for myself, want a return on this investment, especially if you're in a situation where, you're the first of the family to go to school, that kind of thing. But there are avenues. There's more specificity and diversity in career now than ever before in human history, right? So there are lanes that we can expose people to if we just know something about them, right? Not everybody who comes in who's looking for a big return on their investment needs to go into business, engineering, or medicine or in law. There are other things that you can do, and there are probably some other things that you were gifted in that would help you make a better return on your investment, right?
Yeah,
so we've got to know those stories.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Oh,
and then just from a personal perspective, I was going to ask you, Brittany, to share, about, their personal development, right? Like the power of story. You talked about just the empowerment that comes from story.
Right. And I might take this in a different way, just because I want to make sure there's clarity. And this kind of touches on something that Brooke, you and I talked about a little bit earlier, especially when it comes to students of color, diverse students, and even speaking personally as a student at one point in time, a few years ago, but longer, mm-hmm. Being a Black woman on a predominantly white college campus, I think there were times where my story, I was asked for my story and I wasn't ready to give it, right? Or there was it was exploited, right? Or so on and so forth with that. Or I had an interaction, or I've had students who have had interactions where they were asked and out of kindness or out of like the power differential thought like I need to provide this information because what if I don't? And I didn't know like how to navigate through that. So I think it's truly sacred, and that's part of the development and like coaching of the students, right? It's like it's not airing everything out, right? It's appropriate boundaried vulnerability with who you feel comfortable doing that with. I think it's also on the staff members. I think this is very important, and faculty and employees to be aware of, if you're curious about students who do come from different backgrounds than what you're even accustomed to. And I'm not sure the backgrounds of everyone on this webinar. And so I'm saying this with the utmost respect and kindness. And truly, like, I think sometimes if we're not doing our own work in understanding diversity, equity, inclusion, race, social justice, power dynamics, all of that, I have seen and I've had to navigate situations where lines were crossed, unfortunately, with students of color. And so it really is this art. And I think the onus is also on employees to make sure you're doing your own work separate from, because that helps you in like interaction with, so that it doesn't turn into something where the student is fulfilling some like cultural learning objectives for yourself. And so I think that can be really deeply rooted and seated, and don't even realize that that's happening. And oh my goodness, I'm mortified that I even kind of crossed that line. So that's all part of the process, right? And it's unfortunately been something that I personally have had to navigate, even as a staff member, definitely as a student, and then absolutely like in student situations where we kind of had to back up and have conversations and coach the students through that. And so developmentally, also awareness of, this is where our students are at. This is what's appropriate to ask. This is not what's appropriate to ask. And quite frankly, please be doing your own work so that this doesn't have to be happening with students. So that's my piece, and loving invitation, charge, admonishment for those who are joining us today.
Yeah, I think it's a good observation to remind us, just even just thinking about the age group that we're talking about, that 17 to early 20s, 23-year-old time frame of our lives is such a crucial part of identity development. So it's really sensitive. We're talking to someone who's still trying to figure out who they are and might not be ready to share all parts of that, might not be ready to dig into all parts of that. So it can be really empowering, but it also can be extremely vulnerable. And we have to be thoughtful about how we handle that information.
And I think that's why it's truly, the call of the work is, it's a practice, right? So you don't always sometimes get it right. And you have to learn from it. But I think the more you can be doing your own work separate from, the better you are personally with students, all of that. So it's my piece.
No, that's great. That's really good advice.
Excellent point, Brittany.
Yeah, that's really good. So let's talk a little bit about how do we kind of coach them through maybe some assumptions people have about their story. I think, Julian, you had mentioned to me one time that sometimes we have to help people to think about, when we ask them for a story of something they enjoyed or that they found fulfilling, that maybe they're not even thinking of that right experience, or they need some context for that, just based on kind of narrative that they've received over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel it can be so intimidating, right? Think about coming into an unfamiliar situation where you're being asked, tell me something about yourself. And they don't think much of their story is worth telling for whatever reason, whether it's because of some serious things that they may not be ready to talk about, or if it's just, I haven't really done much, I just got to college, what is there to talk about? There's a spectrum, right? And I think it's important for us to celebrate even the small things, right? That people may not think are important. So I think about one of my very best friends from New York, grew up in Brooklyn. And we were just hanging out one day. We went to grad school together, and he told me a story about him in middle school and how every year he got money from his grandmother and for Christmas. And so he would take that money from his grandmother and buy like the big like cases of candy bars, because at his school they didn't sell candy bars in vending machines. So he would come to school and he would start selling candy bars for, you know, $1, $2, whatever. And that's how he made his pocket money, because he didn't get allowance or whatever, anything like that. And we were having this conversation. He's telling me this story, and I was like, wow, so you were just a salesman from, you know, a super young age. And he was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, you literally took, you know, if I can put this in corporate language for you, you took seed capital from an investor who is your grandmother. You invested that in a commodity that you knew would sell. You had a business plan. You knew when to sell these things, who to sell them to, and you made your money grow. I was like, are you kidding? People go to business school for that. Well, like just for that through line. And you did it at, you know, what, 12, 13, whatever. He had never thought that was an important story when it came to framing his career or framing his interest or his experience. And I was like, what a shame that that wasn't seen and developed, because, you know, in a different neighborhood, I guarantee someone's mom or dad or whoever would see that and they would nurture that and would have nurtured that for the past 4 or 5 years before they got to undergrad. And they would have this fully formed notion of, oh, I do have this story and I do have this experience that can seed into what I'm going to learn here over the next 4 or 5 years. That's what it is. It's celebrating even what could be just, oh, a cute story or an experience in middle school for someone that's really showing, hey, this is how I'm wired. This is the way that I think. This is the way that I connect the dots. And that's massive value in so many different industries. You have to get from behind the surface, though, to find that out about people. You know, we had a relationship, and so he was just sharing something, and I was able to point that out because that's something I'm naturally good at. That's not how everyone is wired.
Right. I love that. I love that. Yeah. So these stories kind of can really be, I think, empowering, but it requires getting to know the student a little bit. So yeah, Brittany, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah.
Idea?
So I think so we're talking about like reframing assumptions, right? So I think, again, you know, I'm reflecting back on, I cannot take a student somewhere I have not, or I'm not willing to go myself. And so what assumptions do I have about their story? You know, so I think some of this too is, again, the personal work folks are doing in order to truly understand, lead, and guide. And it is obvious, you know, and I've felt it, you know, I've guided students enough who have felt like, yeah, this interaction, I can tell this person is maybe, they're really not understanding me. And I'm like, okay, so then what do you mean by that? Right. And so it's like, what are you doing, you know, whether it's professional like development, and maybe this is getting into another question, Brooke, but I think it's, you know, what as professionals, employees working alongside and with these students, how am I also educating myself around assumptions that I don't even know that I have, so that I can better help guide. I think oftentimes too, when I've had, you know, attended webinars like this, or, you know, there's so much information out there, podcasts, all of that. So I think we're consuming a lot, right? Students are consuming a lot. But the action of consuming is not the action in terms of help. That's just a way of receiving information. So once you receive it, like, how are you putting action behind it to then mitigate some assumptions that you have or to alleviate them so that then you can, in more clean space, appropriately guide students, right? Because I think oftentimes I've been cut off of, like, I didn't realize I had an assumption about this student's story, and I'm noticing it in a conversation that I'm having with them, you know? But I think that quick noticing or in prep can help me then better ask some better questions to get them to think through how they might have the same assumption of their own story, you know? So yes, those are my thoughts about that.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, so I'm curious what other sort of maybe potential blind spots people might have when it's, especially if you think about academic advising and career advising, that, you know, we might need to be watching out for. And this might end up taking us to some opportunities about exposure, but even just in general, just curious what sort of blind spots that maybe you all have seen and encountered on campuses that we should be watching out for as we try to advise and coach students.
You know, I think one thing that I was reflecting on in a preparation for this was this tension of myself as a college student of color, Black woman, you know, at a predominantly white institution, and then also the work that I was doing with students of color, and trying to find some themes between the two. And the one that really stood out to me that was pretty resounding is just this idea of nuance. And so I think personally, so I'm going to share, you know, in the spirit of story, I will share a personal story with you all that I've shared, you know, in other spaces. But for me going into college, I wasn't technically like first gen. I would say I was like 1.5, where I had the parent that I lived with, some college, but didn't do the full thing. And I've worked with actually a lot of students who are in kind of similar boats. And so I was immediately, and I've also seen this and helped mitigate this a little bit and change this in roles that I've had. If you are this, if you have this label, then therefore you need this type of support, which is never really very, very helpful. I think there are definite common denominators. So I want to, again, leave room for nuance. So I think there's enough research, enough common denominators where there is a necessity to have certain support just across the board. But I think that plus nuance, right? So the both and again, that's where it comes to this third way of practicing where we truly need both. So because I felt labeled, or because the students that I've worked with felt labeled by, oh, you come from this background, therefore you need this type of support, without really hearing, like, actually, personally, I didn't in some places, but I did in others. And so I thought I was so sick of being put into a box, or I've had students who are so sick of being put into a box of what was needed, that I ended up losing out. I have had students lose out on support because, oh, I don't want to be put in that category, or I don't need it in that way, or whatever. It's like, no. Right. And so I think it's something that's hard to do. It takes more time, but I think that nuance does truly make all of the difference. That it's not this like catch-all piece. And so Anyway, I hope
Yeah.
that makes sense.
That's a great example.
That's a great example.
So application then would be perhaps, making people aware that certain resources are available, but not assuming that they are going to want to act upon
Right.
that.
Yes, exactly.
That's good. Julian, what else would you add to that? To blind spots?
Yeah, that's a great point, Brittany. And I think that goes back to, treating every, student of color as an individual the same way you would with any other student, not assuming those things. So I took your question a little differently, Brooke. When it came
Go for it, whatever direction.
When it came to the nuances, and so I'm gonna point back to the difference in TruMotivate. So I love assessments. I use a ton of assessments with clients. I've used them with students. I was exposed to assessments at my career services center in undergrad, right? So it's something that they're tools that I really believe can help us gain self-awareness and therefore better inform the next wise step for our lives. Specifically for me, it usually shows up when it comes to career, right? One of the things that is most lacking is they all categorize, well, not they all, several of them categorize. And so when you show up in a bucket or a category, the following thing when it comes to career services is, these are the top 10 career services for your personality type or your Enneagram type or your, whatever, top 5 strengths. And I remember getting that list after the first time I ever took, I think it was Myers-Briggs or something. And I was like, well, I don't want to do any of these 10 things. So am I just done with, with kind of seeking my career? And it that when it comes to exposure, I feel like I had been really exposed, but both of my parents were professors. And so they did very similar things. And, a lot of the people I grew up with, it was business. It was, kind of very big bucket, typical careers. And so I just knew that wasn't for me. And so the thing about TruMotivate is that it really lends itself to speaking more about, okay, if these are your motivations, these are the type of work environments you would thrive in. These are ideal, these are challenging. Even just shifting that a little bit of what would be an ideal environment for me to work in? What's a place where I'm going to thrive individually? And how can my competencies match that? That in and of itself could derail a decade or even an entire career of professional frustration in people. Yes. Because when I work with individuals, that's the number one thing they talk about. It's often not the paycheck that's the biggest source of frustration. It's the fact that you're rubbing 2 pieces of sandpaper together when it comes to what you do on a daily basis and where your true motivation lies.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really
wow,
good.
that sounds like a commercial, but it's so true. I mean, I've done it. I've done it with dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people, and so that is so important to me because I even feel like that's a big part of my career story. I struck out on my own and left a company a few years ago that I was actually doing really well at because I hated the work. But everything in my career path, everything when it came to competency said, oh, you're going to kill this. And I did do well. And I could not stand my job. I could not stand it whatsoever. And what hit me was the fact that I was like, this is my career path. And I'm quickly coming to the point where it's becoming harder and harder to pivot. And this is not a match. So what do I do now? And so I just believe that if we can start students on an open and informed path that starts with them informing us of who they are, developing tools that can really get to the core of that, the core of our why, then we can mitigate so much of that frustration. And productivity comes with that, right? Like you see that kind of stuff in the bottom line. And you see that kind of stuff in people's individual satisfaction, happier parents, happier families, happier relationships. Those things correlate. And so I just think it's so important that students of color not be left out when it comes to that kind of work. because as Brittany articulated, it is so often that, oh, this is what you need because this is what we have developed for people like you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the retort is, you don't even know me yet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think you make a really good point too about just pathway. Maybe I wanted to double click on that a little bit, because so much of what I think we do in this phase of college and even grad school, if they go on to that, is like narrowing the pathway, right? You're taking this huge funnel of all these things you could do and narrowing it down to things that maybe one or two things that seem to fit, which is not a bad thing in and of itself because it gives us clarity. Sure. But then I think we get stuck in this mindset of like, this is the path, as you were describing, like you were on that right pathway. And when you realize that certain things aren't fitting, you begin to think, well, now where do I go? This is a dead end path. So what do I do here? And I think if we can start that programming early in the college stage of resilience, of decision making as opposed to pathway, of looking to see what opportunities are around you and taking advantage of maybe upskilling if needed, and going in slightly different directions, or even rethinking the nature of the culture in which I'm working. Maybe not the job, but the environment. Those may all be things that give us empowerment in those decisions in the future, so that we don't feel like we've gone down a dead end, but actually no, there's tons of opportunities available to us if we step back and look at all the really things that we love and things that we're good at and where those intersect. So I know we've talked a bit about just using that time to expand their sense of what's possible, which is counterintuitive, I think. When you're trying to find your way, you want to narrow it, but also later in life, that's going to be huge to be able to maybe expose students to some possibilities that will expand what's possible for them, what their future might look like.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's about building a life, and so that means there's work and then there's other things, right? And this is what I might need in a work environment, but to have the confidence, to have the language to know that, it's like I feel like I'm just learning some of that now. And so, to Julian's point, like a decade later, that it's a holistic, and I want to then choose a major that supports maybe some of these natural intrinsic why values that I have, right? And it matches kind of not only work environment, but then also provides this holistic narrative of this is how I want my life to be designed. Mm-hmm. And that's incredibly powerful to have that, or to even, approach that type of conversation at that age. Mm-hmm. So.
Agreed. I think it also, that kind of experience, giving people that kind of experience in an academic institution, that's going to, and it's not always about return, but those are the students that evangelize their schools after they leave, right? Mm-hmm. We have those people who, oh yeah, I went to so-and-so, if you ask, or if you're on my LinkedIn. But they don't evangelize about the experience because it didn't affect them in that way, right? They weren't treated in that way. When you are treated in that way from an institution, it stops being just an institution that you spent some time at. It becomes a place that was actually formative in a very positive way. And then they get to come back and they get to interact with your current students and they become valued alumni. These are places that truly help benefit individuals, the professional realm, and our society as a whole.
That's a really good point. I'd love to end with maybe a couple of really practical notes like that, of what are some practical ways of helping students expand their sense of opportunity in their time on campus, beyond just internships. What are some ways to expand their exposure?
So I think some things that just come to mind, and maybe I'll say this and then let Julian answer, and then I'll answer again. To just get, I think some of the most like practical, like helpful spaces have been just so figuring out like some things that you like to do. Are there spaces or events or programs that pique your interest that help continue to cultivate that? For example, I had a student who he was not really into the rah-rah fun programming. He liked actually having like deeper conversations about subjects that he was passionate about. And one of the areas that I oversaw like actually hosted like smaller conversation events that students could attend, right? And it took him a while because there were some things, I think, in him getting acclimated to the university that it was just a lot and didn't have time to go to, but he eventually attended some, which then spurred on, when I met with him later, some conversations around, I really appreciated what this speaker spoke about, and I would love his contact information because what he does is something that I actually think I might like to do. And so it all stemmed from him coming to this program that my area put on, not career related. It was on a subject that he liked, but he appreciated the person who was presenting, which then opened up his imagination for, I might want to do something like that. And I never thought that that could exist, even within the like major that I was studying, that I could apply it in this way. Because I think the speaker even had like a similar background, but wasn't doing the exact same thing. So anyway, that was something that I think just practically, you know, where are some just areas that you can get plugged in to explore, you know, and that could lead to something. You could meet somebody, you could hear something you never heard before, you know, and that all continues this rhythm of your development, right? And you start asking yourself better questions about next steps, and we can continue to have those conversations. So it can be truly just as easy as that, but there needs to be then the onus on the student to go, right? Yes. So it can't just be me like spoon feeding you, which can be hard, right? And that can also delay some things. And then there's just the practical like student leadership opportunities, right? Some of the internships that are offered on campus. So those are pretty obvious, but I kind of wanted to think some of the non-obvious things that I've seen actually be surprisingly incredibly powerful and fruitful.
That's great. Love that.
Really good. That's really good.
Julian, what else?
Yeah, so I would say if you want to increase the exposure of your student body, you've got to increase your own first. It's as simple as that. You've got to know how is the marketplace evolving? You know, what are, you know, Fortune 500 companies doing? What's shifting when it comes to the way that they employ, the way that they hire, the way that they structure, you know, their companies. What's on the horizon? You know, keep yourself informed. Like, be on, you know, Fortune.com. You know, be in the marketplace, not just in the classroom. And I really do mean that. So many things are informed by academia, but I think it's important, especially important when that's a two-way street. You know, in recruiting, I always have to be looking at what are companies looking for, how is that shifting over time, and where is it headed? And you have to kind of make those guesses. And there are entirely new industries. We're in a time where there are entirely new industries popping up that there could be, you know, your student body could be uniquely gifted to take advantage in them and really thrive in them, especially because so many of them are tech focused. And we're looking at things in newer and different ways and from different angles than we ever have before. So be informed when it comes to that. Be informed when it comes to that, and just know your student body. Know where there could be plug-in places for that. You know, whether it's bringing in speakers or having them exposed. I know Brittany, you know, mentioned, you know, the internship, which I love internships. I was exposed to so much in my internships, but you know, you may not even know like what are the most pertinent internships that we have available for our students. Is it the ones that we've had for the last 15 years, or maybe there's some new opportunities.
Yeah.
You have to continue to inform yourself and expose yourself to what's out there and available for people. I was, in my late 20s before I even knew what something like a physician assistant was. I had heard the term, but I was like, okay, whatever, because I wasn't in medicine. Then I started recruiting for physician assistants, and so I needed to know that. But not everybody whose parents say, go be a doctor or a lawyer, maybe they're not fit to be a doctor. Maybe that's not the realm, but you could still make an incredibly great living being a nurse practitioner, being a physician assistant, these other positions in the same realm that aren't just part of this mold that we say, oh, you're interested in medicine, then think about medical school, think about X, Y, and Z, So keep yourself exposed, keep yourself up to date on what's going on in the marketplace.
That's great. That's really good advice.
And I've also been incredibly surprised because remember, as we were talking about at the top of this conversation, like the access to information, exposure that students already have. So I have been surprised even at, I need to catch up with them because information that they find out through social media, TikTok, there's this new like TikTok resume thing that's going around, which is very interesting. We could talk about it another time, but just it's ever evolving and changing. So I think to Julian's point, just the relevancy and really figuring out, like at times I've had to ask students, like, where are you getting your information? How are you getting your information? And it's so fast that, to keep up, it's almost like at times I feel I don't want them to be ill-advised, right? So how do I stay even on beat? Because sometimes they're driving it because of the different unique combinations of things that they're seeing through their different networks and the amount of access to information and social media and all of that they have. So humbly.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I think that's even a good tone to set up with the students. We should learn from each other. And the one thing I was going to throw out as a recommendation to help them get exposed is just introducing them to alumni or even people that alumni know, just thinking of anyone who might be in certain fields that they could just connect with and meet with. It's the idea of they might learn from them and vice versa. It's a mutual opportunity for education in that respect and exposure in that respect. So I think leveraging that as much as possible can just help just to see and get a sense of what's out there is huge.
Right.
Well, thank you both for your insights on this. Some of these have been just maybe even the unexpected tips that have been, I think, really sharpened, enabled us to sharpen our thinking about how to truly help students, how to truly enable them, and not just kind of tick boxes. So this has been really insightful. So I thank you all so much for sharing these experiences you have and what you've learned along the way with our team here. And appreciate both of you and just all the work that you do to develop the next generation. It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Grateful for this opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Absolutely.
And, one more thing. Shout out to Dale. I saw you in the chat.
I know.
Yes.
I saw you.
Yes, fantastic. Yes, thank you. And thank you, all of you who have joined us today, and even those who'll be watching later. Grateful for you taking this step of just sharpening your own understanding and education and skills to be able to help students of diverse backgrounds. So we appreciate you. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.